A common issue for Bubble developers is knowing how to display data that they've got, whether it's in a table, in a repeating group, or they just want to actually show some information in their app to a user in a way that isn't a clunky looking pop-up or a pop-up that blocks the rest of the screen. And the best way to achieve this with really nice UX, really nice UI and good design is with a side panel floating group pop-out, which is what we've got here. And while that's a bit of a mouthful for a name of an element, it's a really easy and clean way to display data to your users. It's super easy to learn how to do it. And it gives you a way to essentially move away from relying on just pop-ups coming up in the middle of the screen or clunky sort of drop downs or having people move to a different part of the platform. What you can do is leverage this sort of UI to show data. And this is obviously just some example data. You can really build out lots of functionality in these side panel pop-ups or pop-outs, whatever you want to call them. So in this video, we're going to jump into how you can very quickly in the next about 20 minutes create this, and you can customize it to your own data, and it's going to give a real edge to your design in your Bubble apps and give you a great new way to show and display data with some fantastic design work behind all of it. If you enjoy the video, make sure to join the Bubble Design Lab on Skool, where there is plenty more content like this, some quick solution answers around this sort of content, and even access to the editor link and preview links for this exact build that you're going to go through in this video. Hope you enjoy. All right, so let's jump straight into this video so we can get this done nice and quickly. What we're trying to do here is build a floating group pop-out that comes from the side when we select a certain bit of data in our app. In this case, it's going to be this line item that we've got here in our table. When someone clicks on this payment request, I think the data type, it's a transaction. When someone clicks on this transaction, we're going to open a floating group panel from the side that's going to show us a bit more information. But something people tend to overlook when they're doing this is the fact that you want to actually gray out the rest of the page. And it's something that people often don't know how to do or forget to do or actually don't do. And the reason that we want to gray out the rest of this page when a floating group comes out from the side is that we want to focus the user's attention over to this side of the page. And that's a really important part of design, that we're not just having this floating group pop out and then leaving the rest of the page sort of unchanged. So let's get started with it. We're going to go into the asset search box and we're going to type in floating group or floating. As soon as the floating group appears, select it, drop it anywhere onto the page, and we're going to call this floating group transaction. Now, once we've named the floating group, you can use whatever data type you want, but in this case, it's going to be for me a transaction. We select the data type as transaction, and then the data source for this is actually going to be a custom state that we set for floating group transaction. And some people might do this differently, but this is just my approach to doing it. Some people like to just send the data. I like to actually send it as a custom state. So we're going to select, once we're on floating group transaction, select this I symbol here, do add a new custom state and type in transaction. The state type is going to be transaction. So make sure you're selecting it from data types. Again, it can be whatever you want the data is that you're going to send, whatever you want it to be. We'll close that. And now we're going to say under data source, floating group transactions, transaction. It's essentially, we're just sending this custom state. We're setting a custom state for this floating group, and then we're sending that to this floating group once someone selects this line or this item in the table. Again, some people have different approaches to it, but this is just the way I like to do it for a few reasons. Now, what we can do is deselect or unselect, make this element fixed width, deselect, fit height to content, and we actually do want it to cover our whole page. But what we're going to do now is go across to appearance. Under flat color for the floating group transaction or floating group that we're working on, we want to select, let's try F4, 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 and then opacity 15%, maybe a bit higher than that actually. Let's try the opacity at 50%. Could probably go a bit darker with that actually. So let's move that up. Let's try A6, A6, A6 with 25% opacity. We're just trying this. I'm just building this out and sort of trying to fit a certain design within this app already. So we'll try that out and see what it looks like in terms of the grayed out section. And if we don't like it, we can always come back and change it. Awesome. So this is actually the floating group that comes across the whole page when someone has selected this line or this item that they want to see in the table. But now we want to actually put in the floating group, a group that's going to contain the data that we want to display. So we're going to drop a new group in there, and we're going to call this group transaction. Let's say transaction view. Type of content is transaction. Data source is parent group's transaction. So the parent group is the floating group transaction. So it's just going to say, once we've set a custom state for this floating group transaction, which we've got here, once we've clicked this line item in the row, it's going to set the state, and then we're going to use the parent group's transaction to display that data. Jump back into the floating group transaction, go across to layout, and what we want to do here is we just want to say 12 padding all the way around. So 12 padding top, bottom, left, and right. And this is going to give us a bit of space with this group that does pop out, and so that it's not right up against the edge here. Now what we can do is we can deselect fit height to content. It's going to drop our group transaction view all the way down. It's going to cover most of the screen. And we're now going to say that we want it to be horizontally aligned over on the right-hand side. And we want the max width to be 35. And then instead of pixels, we do %. Select make this element fixed width. And that is now where our pop out, or whatever you want to call it, display of the payment we're viewing is going to show up. Over in appearance, let's change the background style to flat color. And the background color for it is going to be F6, F6, F6. And we want the roundness for the actual group itself, this pop out, to be 10. Notice I'm using the word pop out instead of pop up because I guess this is a very different form of displaying data than a pop up. Awesome. So there we have it. There's our sort of background of the floating group that grays out the rest of the screen again, or the rest of the page. Again, we can come back and change this color if we want at some stage to make it a bit grayer or less gray. But this is our pop up, pop out, whatever you want to call it, that's going to display the transaction. Fantastic. So now let's go into layout and let's use some padding on the group transaction view again. And we're going to do 12 padding all the way around again, maybe even a little bit more. Let's do 16, and we're just sort of seeing how this is going to look initially. Scroll down, I just got rid of that. We're just going to see how this looks initially just with this padding. And the first thing we're going to do is select some text, go across to the group and drop it into the group that we've created. Now we want this to be, I guess, a title for this group to indicate to the user what they're looking at. So we're going to type in view transaction, and we're then going to select a font size of, let's try 16, maybe 18. We want the font weight to be 600. That looks good. Layout is going to be, we're going to select fit width to we're going to deselect fit width to content for this, this header that we've got there. I think that looks all right for the moment. Now go into your asset search box, select icon, and we're going to drop that just below text view transaction. And we want it to basically sit anywhere in here below text view transaction. And once we've done that, we can now select text view transaction in the elements tree, holding shift on our keyboard, select the icon below it, right click either of them, and then select group elements in row container. Awesome. Go across to layout, or we're going to call this group transaction view header. This is the one that we've just created within group transaction view. Go across to layout, select or deselect the min height, get rid of it and make it from 40 to 0. And we're now going to add 8 padding below it. So we've got a little bit of padding below this header item that we've got. Go across to appearance. Again, for group transaction view header, select define each border independently. Border style is going to be solid for the bottom border only. So we've got all of our borders here, top, right, bottom, and left. We want to select just the bottom border. We want the width to be 1, no roundness. And then we're going to select the color to be a light gray sort of color. If you don't have any presets added already, just do E6, E6, E6. So we can see we've got our header there, we've got an icon, and then we've got a nice light line below them grouped together. Awesome. So now what we're going to do is select that icon, and we're going to search for the icon close. Select an icon from that drop down. We're going to change the color from primary to red. So you can use whatever you want, but this is essentially the icon that's going to indicate to the user that they can close this pop out. And we just want it to be, I would usually use a red or slightly red color. I don't mind this sort of red. Just to indicate to the user this is something they can use to close it. It is something that's going to exit this sort of session that they've got open here. Fantastic. And what we're going to do with this, we might as well set this up while we've got it open. On the icon, we're going to click add workflow. We're going to rename this, ignore all the other sort of workflows I've got here. We're going to rename the workflow or using this icon, and we're going to say transaction view close pop out. So you can call it whatever you want, but this is just, I guess, relevant to what we're doing. And we're going to say the first thing we're going to do is animate an element. We want group view transaction, or transaction view, was it? Group transaction view. So that's this one. We want to take this, that element or that group, and we want the animation to be, you type in right for the animation, transition, slide right out, define a custom duration, make it 400. And what we're just doing here is essentially when someone clicks that close button, it's going to push out the group view transaction or transaction view out to the right. It's sort of going to exit to the right of the screen. We're going to put a pause in here, and that pause is going to be 400. We're going to say hide the status bar as the pause occurs. We're then going to say set state of an element, and that is going to be group transaction view. We're going to, that's going to be floating group transaction. We're going to get rid of that transaction, and then we're going to say hide an element, and it's going to be floating group transaction. And so go through and do these steps. Feel free to pause it. I'll just click on these quickly so you can see what I've done in each one. But what these are essentially doing is we're saying that when we've got a transaction open in this transaction or this group transaction view, when it's displaying a transaction and we click that close button up in the top right corner, what's going to happen is it's going to animate nice and smooth. It's going to push this floating group out to this side of the screen. It's going to disappear. We want it to pause just slightly. And we want it to pause for the same duration as that animation, which is why we've put 400 seconds. We could probably do 300 seconds if we want, but we'll keep it as 400. We want to pause so that the gray color doesn't just suddenly disappear before this transaction is animated out of the screen. And then the final, or this step, is to then reset the state. So we don't want to have an existing transaction as the state for floating group transaction anymore. And this is why I like to use custom states. It's a little bit cleaner in my opinion, and just gives us a way to sort of, I guess, manage the states a little bit better. Fantastic. So let's go in and let's add some information to this section now. All right, so for this, we're going to keep it very simple. There's a lot of things that we could do with this, but I just want to, I guess, give you an idea of, it's more about, I guess, this pop out, this floating group pop out functionality. So what we're going to do is we're going to go across to group transaction view, which is the big one we've got here. Click into layout, do apply gap spacing between elements. And we're going to do gap spacing of 16. And this is just preparing us for when we've got some items in here. We're going to go across then to text, select some text from your asset search box, and then drop it into this floating group here. And what we're going to say is we're just going to pick some of the, I guess, some data points from this data type that we can reference and give the user more information in here. So I haven't even looked at what I've got set up. So I'll just jump into my database, have a look, and then come back and we can set those up. Okay, so let's begin with a pretty standard one, which is going to be the amount. We've got it listed in cents. So we're going to format that as, we're actually going to delete that. We're going to do amount cents times 100. And we're going to format that as a currency. Decimal places are going to be 2. We want a decimal separator. So this is where you can sort of customize it to fit your own need. But just in this example, if you are following along and sort of want to, I guess, do exactly what I'm doing, I'll give you a quick look at what I've got set up for my database. Here, we've got a transaction data type in here. And here are some of the fields that I've got under my transaction data type. So if you want to do it exactly, you can copy this if you want. Completely up to you, but I would say that most people watching this are probably just going to fit it to their own sort of needs. What we're essentially going to do is just put some information in here that shows the user a bit more about this transaction or this data type that they're not able to see in the table. So we put a bit of information in here, and this is going to be the actual data. Like, this is dynamic data that we're pulling from our database. So I do want to make it a little bit stronger in terms of sort of giving it a bit more definition and color than we would, I guess, a classification of what this data is, or like an indication of what this data is. And what I mean by that is if I copy this text and paste this text, so if you follow along with this, just once we've added our first bit of data, or the first sort of data point that we're putting in there, copy it, paste it, and we're gonna click on the bottom one, hold shift on the keyboard, left click on the top one, right click, and then go group elements in a row container. Group, we're gonna call this group transaction, transaction view amount. Go layout, get rid of the fit height to content, make min height 0, and then container alignment is end to end. We have space between. We sort of want it sitting on either side of this. We're going to select on the left-hand side the data that we've got there. We right click and clear expression. So we're going to clear that out, and we're just going to say amount. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier, where I would always say that this should be less defined, or less, it should have sort of less weight to it. Usually a different color. You might want to make it a slight gray. Maybe that's a little bit too light, but I would usually just make this a slightly less sort of defined color, tone, weight, all of the above than the actual piece of data that we've got there. Awesome. So now we've done that, we can close up on the left-hand side the group that we've got holding these two items. We're going to right click it, and we're going to copy and then right click and paste. Now we can call this one, instead of group, the new one we've got, instead of group transaction view amount, we're going to call it transaction view customer. We'll change amount to customer. Why don't we say customer email? And then we can go through and add in user. Why don't we even just say user first name? And we'll change customer email to customer name. Now we can change the canvas placeholder for this as well. We're just going to say Nick. Again, it doesn't matter too much what data we're putting in here. You've probably got your own data sets that you want to put in. I'm just putting it in there to sort of show, I guess, a few ways that you can display this information. The next one we're going to do is going to be merchant. Why don't we do date? Actually, I keep just making stuff up. We'll change the formatting so that it looks like that. Looks nice. I'm going to say transaction date. We're going to right click, we'll rename that group to transaction view date. Right click, copy, right click, paste. And then we will make this one merchant. And we can change that to be merchant. Ooh. And then we'll change the canvas placeholder to bubble design lab. Shameless self-promotion as always. Okay, so we can select this group now, and we can change date to say merchant as well. We've got a bit of data in here, but we do want to, I guess, spruce this up a little bit, give it a bit more life than it's currently got. And the way that I do that is to actually give it a sub menu that we can use in here, where we can jump between two different types of data. That's usually how I'd sort of approach one of these side panels that jumps out. I'll go into, I guess, the side, the sort of sub menu in here a little bit more in some other videos. But for now, we're just going to add a bit more information down here and a few other sort of buttons and interactive points in here that we can use, just so you've got a really simple way to sort of build this out for yourself. So what we're going to add first of all is just a bit of a line. We're going to group these text together. So what we want to do is just select one on the left-hand side, hold shift on your keyboard and left click the bottom one, right click, group elements in, and then column container. Now we'll go up, we'll call this transaction details or transaction view details, go to layout, and then select apply gap spacing between elements. We're going to make the gap spacing, was it 16 or 12? It was 16. So we're going to make the gap spacing 16. And we're now going to go to the bottom of this group. So we'll scroll down, we'll go to the bottom, and we'll put padding of 8 at the bottom. As we can see here, we've got some padding down there. Go back to appearance, define each border independently. Border style bottom will make solid, and we're going to put in another border as we did before up the top here. We're going to put a border on this text as well. And as I said, You can definitely build this out more and sort of make it look really nice with a sub menu in here where you can jump between different items. But just for this video, I'm more focused on the actual pop out functionality than anything else. Now we're going to drop in some text that's going to sit below that group that we've just created, and we're going to call this notes. I'm going to make this a little bit stronger in terms of the actual weight of the text itself. I think I did 513. Yep. So we'll do the same for that. And then we're going to search for multi-line input. We're going to drop that in this group, and we're going to type in our placeholder, or we're going to name the multi-line input transaction notes. Placeholder can be add notes about this transaction. On the layout tab, we're going to click or uncheck make this element fixed width. We're going to then go back to appearance. We'll bring the font size down to 13. We can change the border width to 1. We want the roundness to be 10. So we've got, we want the roundness to be 10, and we'll bring up the, we'll keep the border at 30 for the moment. I'm going to click on notes, holding shift on the keyboard, left click on multi-line input transaction, right click, group elements in column container, and we're just going to make the gap spacing here. So on group transaction view notes, we're going to make the gap spacing 8. So we'll make it half of what the spacing is in the rest of this. Again, this is a really simple layout. It's more just to give you a look at this actual pop-up or pop-out itself. And that's, to be honest, that's about it for the actual design work that I want to do here. We might come back towards the end and fix up some of the colors and changes, but now we're going to build in a trigger for how we can actually allow this to pop out and look really nice and animate out properly. So what I'm going to do here is we're just going to go across the floating group transaction. We're going to hide it, and we'll go into the table, whether it's a table or repeating group, doesn't really matter. But the approach I'm going to take here is that we want the user to be able to click on anywhere across this row. So we've got a action down the end where they can click on this link icon, which does a different sort of action, but we want them to be able to click on anywhere in this row to trigger that floating group to pop out. So we click on the row, go across to appearance, make sure we're clicked on the row in the elements tree, go across to appearance and add workflow. We're going to call this transaction view select item. We're going to say we want to set state of an element. The element is floating group transaction, the one that we've created. We want the custom state transaction, and then the value to be, is this a payment request? Okay, so we're using a different table here. That's all good. I'm just going to jump across to a different page and fix that. Give me 2 seconds. Awesome. I was playing around with that a little bit before, so just change the data type in the table. So we've fixed that. So basically, whatever the data type was that we set for this floating group. So if we go back up to floating group transaction, the one that we created, whatever the custom state data type was, which is transaction in this case, that is what we're selecting here when we say to set a state when a row in the table has been selected. So we're saying that we want to set the state for floating group transaction. We want to set the custom state transaction and its current rows transaction. Now, once we've done that, we can say show an element, which is going to be floating group transaction. And then we can say animate an element, which is going to be group transaction view. We want it to, we're going to type in right in animation. So transition slide right in. And we want this to be an animation time of 400. All right, so we're going to close this. Let's have a look at how that is looking in the preview. Just before we jump into that, a few changes we should be making. So I did have a look at it in the preview. On floating group transaction, go across to layout and uncheck this element is visible on page load. And with the amount, it's probably different for your data, but I did times 100 instead of divided by 100 because we don't want to see 100 times the cents. And that should give us a good look at it now. So we'll jump across to the preview and see what it looks like. All right, so we're on the preview screen. We can see when we're selecting a row now, we select that, pops out from the right, looks really nice. Again, it's less about what we actually have in here and more about the functionality of having this repeating group or this floating group jump out and come out. You will have noticed there's a bit of a load, so that looks really good, but then there's a little load at the end there. That's because we put the load in there to allow for the animation to occur before the rest of the floating group disappears. It's up to you if you want to keep that or not. I guess if you're loading data, it's not the worst bit of UX in the world to have a load sort of happening in the background, because there is actually data moving. But it's up to you whether you want to keep that or not. But I think for the most part, what we've got here looks really, really clean. That's a nice sort of open out close animation, and we can do it for any of these as well. We can see this one is 500. Go down into this. We'll go down into that one. That's 2078.50. Looks really good to me. Awesome. Hope you enjoyed that. I will definitely be making more in the way of floating group designs and pop outs and those sort of videos. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing more of that.